Well, hello, Haven. Kind of a weird way to be doing this, I realize, but let's roll with it. Given that it's me doing the Pride Month reflection, you might well guess, if you know me, that it's going to be a reflection on history. So what I'm going to do today is tell you about a queer pioneer who is one of my most admired people, but that most folks have never heard of, the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was a 20th century multiracial, queer, transmasculine human rights activist, also a legal scholar, feminist, labor organizer, poet, Episcopal priest, and according to the Episcopal Church, a saint. She, which was the pronoun she used throughout her life, or they, the pronoun that many trans activists feel more accurately describes their gender expansive life, was ahead of so many curves in developing social justice tactics, strategies, and ideas, as well as eventually embracing the necessity for strong spiritual underpinnings to support those practices and ideas, that doing justice to even some of their story would easily take up much more time than I've got. So I will just give you a few highlights. She was born Anna Pauline Murray in Baltimore in 1910, but was orphaned as a teen after her mother's death and her father's murder, and raised by an aunt in North Carolina, which is where she graduated from high school in the 1920s. The timeline is important to keep in mind here. This is a person who was in high school in the 1920s. She moved to New York City and attended Hunter College, where they graduated with distinction in the mid-1930s, and then worked for the WPA, a progressive New Deal government agency. And at that time also began taking steps to change their gender, which included changing their name from Anna to the more gender neutral Pauli, and seeking gender affirming male hormone therapy decades before that became common or even legal. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, they tried to enter the segregated University of North Carolina grad school and enlisted the help of Eleanor Roosevelt to try and do so, thus beginning a lifelong activist friendship between the two. And later got arrested for refusing to go to the back of a segregated bus in Richmond, Virginia, as part of a struggle to end segregation on public transit there. Again, this is all in the 1940s. She enrolled in Howard Law School, where she co-founded the later very prominent civil rights organization CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, graduated as a valedictorian, but was then denied entrance to Harvard, which previous Howard valedictorians had routinely been granted. And she was denied that not because of her race, but because of her assigned sex. So she got a master's from what is now Berkeley Law instead. In the 1950s, they had their research and the constitutional arguments they developed during the 1940s used by some of their Howard professors, most famously Thurgood Marshall, to win the overturning of legal segregation in Brown versus Board. And then more than a decade before Roots, she published a memoir of her family's struggles in America and moved briefly to Africa to teach law and better explore her African heritage. And then in the 1960s, she became the first woman admitted to Yale Law and criticized the civil rights movement for what she called, quote, the blatant disparity between the major role which Negro women are playing at the grassroots level and the minor role of leadership they have been assigned. Out of that concern, she helped convince Betty Friedan to help her co-found NOW, and then extended the legal reasoning and arguments of hers that had been used previously in the battles around racial segregation. She extended those to gender and published the arguments which Ruth Bader Ginsburg later famously used both to win landmark civil rights cases for women and to earn a place on the Supreme Court. So if you are keeping score, this is not one but two major civil rights battles that she was at the very center of the legal reasoning behind, only to have her work used by people who won the battles and ended up on the Supreme Court. In the 1960s and 70s, she became a full professor at Brandeis, but on the death of her female partner of 15 years, resigned her fully tenured position to explore spiritual questions, because she believed, despite all the major human rights victories she'd seen, that only changes grounded in love could satisfy and endure. She studied for the Episcopal priesthood and predictably and fittingly enough became one of their first female priests. I'll leave you with a few of her own words from one of her 1970s sermons, in the hope that I've piqued your interest enough that you'll want to learn more about why, after her death in the mid-1980s, that church body, the Episcopal Church, felt compelled to fast track the requests that so many were making, that this queer way shower on so many fronts be proclaimed a modern saint. This is what they had to say in 1977 about their own life. Quote, "It was my destiny to be the descendant of slave owners as well as slaves, to be of mixed ancestry, to be biologically and psychologically integrated in a world where the separation of the races was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States as the fundamental law of our Southland. My entire life's quest has been for spiritual integration, and this quest has led me ultimately to Christ, in whom there is no east or west, no north or south, no black or white, no red or yellow, no Jew or Gentile, no Islam or Buddhist, no Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, or Roman Catholic, no male or female. There is no Black Christ, no white Christ, no red Christ, although these images may have transitory cultural value. There is only Christ, the Spirit of love." Happy Pride, everyone.